Hey folks, you're listening to the Idea Roastery. I'm Herman.
I'm Jason.
So Jason, how do you feel social media is going right now in the year 2026 of our Lord?
It's going a bit wonky, I'd say. I know myself, like I've actually tried to like reduce my social media intake, and I think a lot of people are feeling a lot of fatigue from what's going on I think all of the social media platforms. I mean, the ones that I mostly interact with are Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube to an extent, and especially on the two sort of text-based platforms, what I'm seeing is a lot of, well, just in myself, a lot of just general fatigue, and I think the cause of it is mostly, I think it's AI, right? Like the fact that people are using AI to kind of just generate text and just pump it out to people. I think people like initially it was kind of quite easy to tell when something was AI generated, and now it's become like quite subtle in a sense. And I think some of the discourse that's happening, especially on Twitter now, with, I mean, comments, first of all, as being mostly driven by AI just for engagement, is causing, I mean, myself to just almost like check out of the ecosystems.
Yeah, I guess the incentives are there. There are very strong incentives to create engagement with your Twitter/X profile and LinkedIn, especially on an individual level. And I agree with you that AI is starting to become very difficult to suss out. For example, about 3 days ago, I was reading this blog post that was just a person saying how much they miss Terry Pratchett. And, you know, I love Terry Pratchett's work. It's a set of books that I read again and again. I have The Great Tatooine and The Discworld tattooed on my arm. And I'm reading this post where he's saying some stuff that I feel about Terry Pratchett as well. Like he was taken too soon, and he had such a vast internal universe, and you know he had so much more delight to give the world. And unfortunately, Alzheimer's got him a bit too early. But the style that the post was written in was in Terry Pratchett's style. Now, Terry Pratchett has a very particular style of writing that is incredibly hard to replicate. You would have to be a stupendously good writer in order to replicate the style of Terry Pratchett. And the person who was writing this post was doing this. Now, I'm sitting there reading this post and I can't shake the feeling that either this person has been honing his craft as a writer for many, many years and is probably a published author, or he's just gone to ChatGPT and said, you know, write a post about how much I miss Terry Pratchett in the style of Terry Pratchett. Now, there's no way for me to prove this one way or another, but I do mourn the days when I could read a piece of writing and if it was good, be like, wow, this person is a great writer. Or look at a piece of art and be like, wow, this person is a great artist. And I think a lot of that beauty in the world has been stripped away, because now every time I read something that's great, I have to scratch my beard at it and say like, it could be good, but it could also be AI. And that is something I've been struggling with.
And it's not just the AI, I think. It's like there's, as you alluded to, is that there's a lot of incentives, right? And I think the way that social media has gone is that it's become less about sort of spreading your art form. I think when it first came out, obviously, like it's like Facebook and stuff was always about connections and stuff. What I always liked about it was there was a conduit for finding new, interesting sort of art forms, whether it's like someone who's written something interesting, whether it's like someone who's got like dropped like an image that they've drawn or created. And specifically for me, like I was a big follower, or still am, as like this build in public movement where people like just posting like what they've been doing, like something technical. I do really enjoy that part of social media. But what it's evolved to is instead of just being a conduit for getting your art or your work out there, it's become a system to hack where you are going on there just to get followers. And especially on X, this is coming to the fore because they've created this incentive for creators to get paid out based on your impressions. And what this has caused is like a very nasty, like, first of all, just like theft of other people's art or other people's posts. And some of the posts are not even that great. And it's like pure, just like someone just cropping a picture. There was like a very sort of big Twitter person who just got like demonetized a little bit because he's been like actively just like ripping off some small creators like art form and just like reposting it and getting loads of like views. And so the incentives are just really bad. And what I guess I think about as well is, although for like an American, like a couple of dollars a month is like, you know, it's a nice thing to have for just posting your work out there. For some people in like sort of developing nations, that could be like a salary, or it could like, you know, pay for a whole household. And so what you get is this like influx of like, first of all, spammers, but also trying to hack the system, trying to just flood social media with all of this sort of crap. And AI just makes it so much easier to do that, right? If you just want to, like, there's one hack which is like, oh, when you're starting out to build your following, you just got to have like an interesting response to someone's like original post. So someone posts something like insightful, you say, oh yeah, I've also got this like mentality. But what they do is they just take that, put it into ChatGPT, put in like a really like vague or like a not so cool, like interesting post. And it's all about just how many replies you can get. And it's just like become gamified in a sense where people are just like trying to game the system to just get followers so that they can get paid out. And on LinkedIn, I think it's become like a business hack as well, because it, you know, it does, you know, when you're out there, obviously it's a form of like advertising. But on LinkedIn, it's a slightly different one, because I think it's just like someone who's business minded. They're like, yeah, LinkedIn statistically, they've done research that if you're like visible on LinkedIn, that you get more inbound leads, right? So you get these guys who are like post these really like AI generated slot machines of like just this random stuff just on a regular basis, and that's supposed to like drive interest in your business. So there's all these like incentives which are not the actual creator, like, oh, I'm just going to create something interesting and show it to the world. And I think there's a bit of sadness of kind of losing that, and I'm not too sure what are the ways to actually get back to that.
For sure. I know I've said this many times on this podcast, but show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. Charlie Munger, I figured out how to say his name properly. Mm-hmm. And I completely agree. I think it was like 2 years ago that we were talking about how we've passed peak social media, where we're seeing fewer and fewer people, or we're actually seeing a decline in the number of people on social media. More and more people are leaving social media for good. I mean, I left back in 2019 and haven't looked back, but we're seeing more people close their Instagram accounts. And I think LinkedIn is the one that people hold out on because there is career value over there. If you are looking for a job or looking for contracts, etc., etc. But I think that this slopification of content is definitely going to speed up this process, because Instagram, let's talk about Instagram for a moment. Instagram started out as a way for amateur photographers to share their work. Then it became a way for people to share their lives with their friends. And then around COVID, it sort of became more of just a content machine, right? It wasn't even about your friends. It was about serving you content from other creators who either paid to be in front of you, or because the algorithm deemed that this would keep you engaged for longer. I think what happened is Instagram saw what was happening with TikTok, and they're like, we have to get on that. That's the secret sauce over there. And so social media became less of a social media to break up the name over there a little bit, and instead just became a content mole, a way to keep people engaged, an engagement mole, part of the broader attention economy. And due to this, I think people are starting to cotton on to the fact that their lives are not being improved. They're actually being degraded. Before the call, we were talking about how in the UK there's been a bunch of work to prevent young people from accessing social media. Now, this obviously comes with broader implications on how do you verify age, because that has privacy implications. But if we just sidestep that issue for the moment, could you run us through what the findings were with young people in social media?
I think it's like the Milburn report is the name of it, and I think it's found something like almost like 40% of they call them NEETs, so they're not in education, something not in education or whatever, or training something, but basically they're not actively participating in for even finding any form of like a job, and they kind of are alluding. I don't think they've actually released the full report, so it's kind of just been like media saying this, but yeah, it's basically saying that because under 24-year-olds, which is what they looked at, are so sort of glued to social media, they have this like well, first of all, they have a lot of symptoms in terms of like neurodiversity, like depression, anxiety, and they seem to be linking it to this constant attachment to social media, like the fact that your whole life is kind of like, you know, just sending a picture of yourself just to like access some of your like I think it's on Snapchat, you kind of have to like take a picture of yourself and all these kind of you're always like on. And so they're kind of advocating that, you know, companies need to be a little bit more sort of aware of this and, you know, try and make concessions. But obviously there's like in the UK there's also an economic discussion around that, because they have also increased like, you know, the taxation for people and the minimum wage for under a certain age. But there's definitely a trend towards banning social media under 16 years old, which they have done in Australia, I think, already. Which I think apart from like disregarding the privacy aspects, because there are like there's quite a quagmire of privacy issues with how you actually govern the internet. I think it might actually be a good thing, because I look back at myself, and I think I'm quite grateful that I you know managed to have like a childhood without any form of this kind of really being connected. And you know there's this thing where people like are afraid to go viral, and there's like this trend where people go to a party and they like just don't dance or they don't do anything because they're just so afraid someone's going to take a picture of them and upload them and you're going to become like a meme. And so like I'm so glad that I kind of like grew up not necessarily having that and only actually acquiring it once.
Like
and actually
being allowed to make, you know, big social mistakes.
Because I mean, when you're that young, you're gonna do some dumb stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, right
sure.
up until you're like in your mid-20s. But the ramifications were never like, and I guess there was always like cyberbullying was always a thing back when I was that age. But I think now, like, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on like bans and stuff like that, and whether it's something that you think. I mean, I don't know what the situation is in South Africa. I can imagine
like I'm for it as a concept. The problem is when it comes down to the actual practicality of doing it, that is difficult. Is that first you have to define, you know, what is social media. So, for instance, if you are part of a forum that, you know, you're into Pokemon cards, right? Does that count as social media? Well, under the definitions given, like, yeah, I guess it would be. It is a website that people who likely don't know each other go and communicate. Now, I think that that's perfectly healthy to be part of an interest group for a special interest that you have. Although now that I'm saying this, like, I think that, and this is going to sound very Luddite of me, but I actually think that, and this is not going to happen, and I just want to preface this that this is an extremist idea, but I feel like you shouldn't be on phones or anything before 16. Like, go and live a real life in the real world. Go play with your friends in the park. Go hang out IRL in your meat suits. and and oh, sorry, no, non-new meat suits and meat space. I think is the
But the challenge with that is, well, it especially here in the UK, they like a lot of classes are adopting like a digital form of learning, especially like the efficiency side of doing like like computer based assessments and those kind of things, and it kind of. I mean, this has cropped up also on the AI side. Is like it seems like it's a much more efficient way to do work, right? So if you're like looking over like a class of 30 or 40 students, and you need to mark like assessments, right? To do it digitally is going to be way quicker than to do it like via pen and paper, which is what our like teachers used to do in the past. So it's first of all it's kind of being mandated in some like primary to secondary school, but I think there's ways around it. I've interacted with a few people who have got kids. I think the other problem is like different parents have different styles, right? Because it's so easy to just give your kid like this iPad and it will just shut up for like a couple of hours while you just like have some time to like follow up on work or do some house admin. But then if your kid's friend has an iPad and then your kid doesn't, then it becomes like this, like they're getting left out, and then there's like a bit of like
it's like your kid will hate you if you force them to be excluded from their social circle.
And I think the like why I'm a bit in favor of these government bans is because at least it gives it like, okay, the government has said like no, and so that kind of enforces that another parent is not going to do that. But then yeah, I mean it's so hard to say because as you say, it's like,
well, with the education thing that you brought up is that we've actually seen a bunch of I was going to say countries that care about education actually roll back the digital first approach, and they've gone back to pen and paper and sort of removing all devices from schools. And that seems to be going pretty well. And I think that that's more in response to, well, I think it's in response to the over-digitization and people being on social media, but I think it's also a response to you can get access to AI and AI can do your work for you. And the purpose of you being in school is to learn. There was another thing that I read, and I think this was a local community somewhere in the United States where the entire district banned phones in schools. And the headline, and I didn't dig too deeply into the article, but the headline was something along the lines of, once schools banned cell phones, noise returned to the cafeteria at lunchtime. Because like what had been happening is all kids would just be sitting on their phones for the entirety of lunch break. And now that there aren't any, they were actually interacting with each other, and there was conversation going, and they were, duking it out in the real world and learning those social skills that you actually really need to learn at that age. And I think that that's the big one, is that it's not only that kids are getting into the work or entering working age with a warped idea of what the world is like, but also with I hate to say stunted, but like without really learning how to form relationships in the real world.
I guess the thing is, like, these bans, it feels like it's definitely targeted at like one or two companies, right? And it's pretty much Facebook. Like, I think Meta, like everyone like looks at Meta as like the big baddie. Meta and X, those are the two ones. Which is why I think it's such a contentious thing, because on the outset it does seem like it is like slightly politically motivated that those two are being singled out, and you rarely hear of like, oh, they're going to ban YouTube, whereas YouTube is also starting to release the sort of short clips in the same way, and TikTok's also pretty bad, but there like YouTube has got a lot of educational content, so it just is such a complicated issue to sort of weed out all of the kind of negative and positive side. I think also like I like the idea of like no like digital in schools, but then you do get the chance that you'll have people who can't learn at the rate that's good for them, and I think AI is showing that having someone who's like a tutor that's for your specific needs is like one of the best things for educational outcomes. So I think it's like it's going to be hard to mandate that you kind of like remove digital.
I could definitely see a form of schooling where there are the school computers that are fairly locked down in the classroom that give you access to your personal tutor and your work that you are doing at your own pace, because yes, people learn at different speeds. And I forget the name of there's a fairly famous work at your own pace school, digital first school, that's pretty big in the US right now. And it seems to be pretty good. Like, they only do classwork for 2 or 3 hours per day, and they actually make really good progress through the curriculum, and it seems to be going pretty well. Now, it's also mired in controversy, as everything is. They're like, oh, what they do is they just kick out students who underperform so that they can show that their metrics are really good. So it could just be a form of selection bias. Or it could be that, highly motivated parents are sending their kids to this school, and it's really the parents' motivation that means that these are high-performing students. But regardless, I do think that currently digital systems are making education worse and not better. And so if we had a black and white choice between digital systems and no digital systems, I'd err towards no digital systems, because we also know historically that this has worked. It's worked for all of human history, and the marginal gains that you get from these newfangled systems, which are again not necessarily proven, are not worth the sort of attention destroyingness of just destroying the attention of an entire generation.
Yeah, I think the whole I mean, going a bit back to the social media side, I think like the whole debate, I mean, if we were to just ban it outright, I think there will also be negative side effects. I mean, kind of trying to like reverse it and trying to kind of almost be a steel man for the other side. I do see, especially with things like YouTube, there is an economy around creating videos. Whether the videos are any use or not. I mean, I think, to be honest, like the short clip stuff, I think that's probably like where it's. I mean, the thing is, it's not, and it is. I mean, like in the same way when like, I mean, the biggest one is build in public, right? Like, people, like, they build a little project, they like posting what they're doing regularly on a day-to-day basis. There are sites like Indie Hacker that do something similar where you can post about your project. But like, as someone who's like trying to learn that or trying to do that, you can get a little bit of snippet of what's going on. Maybe not in video format, but as sort of text. A lot of AI researchers, and Andre Karpathy is always on Twitter, like posting about what's going on, like all of these kind of things. Like there is a benefit to getting it out there, and there is a place. But I think like what I mentioned before, the incentives of making money on impressions, like having these like tech bro dudes who are just like creating like bots that just like clip media and like post it out, and they're just trying to do it to make a buck. All of these kind of incentives kind of make it a really nasty thing, whereas maybe your first 3 videos are like, you learn something new about maths, you learn that AI is like broken this one barrier, and you learn about, and then suddenly you're looking at like an AI generated cat like fighting a dog, and I think it like maybe it's just the way that it gets sort of built into that sort of mechanism where they're trying to hold you into that platform. On the like long form video, like I'm seeing, like especially in the UK, it is actually, there's a lot of UK creators. Like I think Tom Scott's one of them. There's like a lot of these guys, and the content is generally quite good. And I'd say like in the future, it might be the only, or one of the only sort of formats that's maybe not that AI influenced. There might be people who create using AI, but I don't really see AI taking over like a whole like creation team. And when you've got one creator, you've got the guy who's doing the audio, you've got the guy who's like, sort of finishing it up. Maybe they're going somewhere interesting. And I think there is like an economy that gets built around people making videos, just like in the film industry. Like you've got like one film and you look at the credits, it's like hundreds of people that are sort of benefiting from that one film. So I do see like on like YouTube and those platforms, there's like almost like an economy around it. But I think it's just maybe the mechanisms around it. Maybe it's just the incentives for the platforms to make money that's like there that makes it like the slutfest. Or maybe it's just, as we said, there's like some people who are like, for them making a couple of bucks is like a big deal. But I don't know how we tease out like that from the sort of negative sides of, people being depressed, people like having these false sense of what the world is like they're not able to attain jobs, and it's just like, yeah, it's really complicated.
So I was reading a interesting blog post about a study. I didn't actually read the study itself. I'll just preface it with that. That was showing that there has been a decline in tested intelligence, intelligence over time. So the big one, I think it's the Norwegian military service, or it's the Swedish military service. I'm not too sure. They have a standardized test that they give every year to the new recruits, and it's pretty much the same. And the test scores had gone up and up and up since they started testing until around 2018, 2019, and then they started declining, and they've just been continually declining since then. Now, I think that that's a whole other podcast episode that we can talk about, especially it being sped up by AI, just allowing people to do computational offloading. But I think it really started because people's attention spans have been eroded. And I think one of the most challenging things about learning is not the act of putting things into your brain, it's the act of sitting down and struggling with a problem and just really, forcing your way through it. And in many ways, I think, I've even seen this in myself, and I know I've mentioned this before on our podcast, but I can sometimes see my attention span eroding. I'm like, oh, watch an entire movie, I'm gonna go and watch some YouTube videos instead. And I think, there was a secondary part of the study that was interesting, is it showed that this was not true across socioeconomic brackets, right? So the test scores for well-off kids continues to go up, whereas everyone else, like lower middle class downwards, has started to turn around and decline. And so I guess there's a correlation over there between, maybe the parents of higher socioeconomic students are more restrictive on their screen time, or, and then there's also all the benefits of like being in a stable household environment, etc., etc. But the fact that they aren't being affected by the same knowledge atrophy is an interesting one, and it's worth looking into.
Yeah, I think like moving into like the future, and I guess heading towards an end here. I think like similar to in schools, I think in South Africa, they have this like life orientation kind of class where you kind of learn about the world, and you learn about like, part of it is like physical PT or whatever, where you go and like embarrass yourself like in front of your friends wearing like weird clothes. But that you got taught about like the world and like, religions and stuff like that, which I thought was a good part of at least my education system. It's almost like there needs to be like a digital education part where you kind of learn like, hey, you should be taking like breaks regularly. You should be kind of like, dedicating time to like actually diving deep and reading and doing these other things, and that's going to make you a better person. But I do think there is also like, there needs to be some solution, because it seems like there's a lot of effort and money that's going into undoing these issues, whether like irrespective of how they happen, like there's an uptick in depression, there's an uptick in anxiety, there's an uptick in all of this. And if this report that I mentioned is true, then that's going to lead to joblessness. To undo all that there's so much effort which we could have been put into something else if there weren't these platforms. And so I think there almost needs to be I do think the assessment is good, that there needs to be assessments on this, whether it's feasible for a parent to, not all parents are the same, not all parents have the same socioeconomic outcomes. And so, yeah, maybe it is that there's going to be a mandated ban on certain platforms. On the AI side, it's so early days that we don't know what's really going to happen. But I do know with myself, like I definitely try and at least limit exposure to these platforms. And I try and actively engage more into like longer form content. But not every day is the best. I don't know if you have any. I mean, obviously you're like completely off social media, but do you see how do you have any idea of like what the world's going to look like in a couple of years' time?
Yeah, I think that certain countries are starting to treat social media, and let's call it what it is. It's more like short form content. They're starting to treat it like it's a problem. Kind of like they recognize that, say, gambling is a problem, or alcohol is a problem, or cigarettes are a problem. It is a net drain on society. And so no one really knows what to do about it, but it's good to see countries experimenting with different ways. I think that in many cases they are ham-fisted, but I'm glad that the experiments are happening so that other countries can look at them. We can look at Australia in a couple of years' time and say like, okay, so did this lead to lower depression and better learning outcomes? Yes. Okay, maybe we can emulate that in our country, or, a modified form of that. This worked, this didn't work. So I am optimistic. However, while countries are trying to figure that out, the technology is also progressing at an even faster pace. And so maybe once we figure out Facebook, we'll be way past Facebook being the problem, and it's going to be GPT-6 that just, has operates via a neural implant, and we just become the fingers of the greater hive mind AI.
Yeah. Oh, we'll have to see what happens. Anyway, good chatting, dude.
Ciao.